The shooting range was alive with the rhythmic cracks of rifles, the air sharp with the smell of burnt gunpowder and the tension of competition. Navy SEALs lined up at their lanes, each one a picture of precision and discipline, their rifles gleaming beneath the harsh midday sun. At the far end stood Colonel Briggs, his arms crossed over his broad chest, a smug grin tugging at his lips as he watched his men demonstrate their skill. He had built his reputation on being the toughest, most exacting leader in the unit, a man who didn't tolerate weakness or outsiders. Today, however, there was an outsider among them, a woman named Sarah Carter, dressed in simple jeans and a worn flannel shirt, her hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. She didn't look like she belonged among hardened warriors, and the colonel made no secret of what he thought of her presence. "You sure you want to embarrass yourself here, missy?" he said loud enough for the entire group to hear, prompting a chorus of chuckles from the gathered SEALs. "This isn't some county fair shooting booth. These are elite sniper rifles and you're standing on sacred ground. Men train for years to hit these targets." Sarah didn't rise to the bait. She simply looked at him with calm, unshaken eyes and said, "I'm not here to compete with them. I'm here to test myself." Her voice was even, almost quiet, but there was a steel under it that made a few of the younger SEALs shift uneasily. Briggs laughed, shaking his head. "Test yourself? Lady, no one can hit the 1,000-yard steel plate in this wind, not even my best man. You think you've got what it takes? Be my guest. But don't expect me to hold your hand when you miss every shot." The SEALs laughed again, though a few of them were starting to feel a twinge of curiosity. Sarah gave no reply. She stepped up to the firing line, examined the heavy sniper rifle laid out before her, a Barrett MRD, its matte black finish dull in the sun, and began checking the weapon with practiced hands. That caught the attention of Petty Officer Grant, one of the unit's senior snipers. His eyes narrowed as he watched her handle the rifle with the kind of ease that only came from years of experience. "Colonel," he murmured, "she knows her way around a rifle." Briggs snorted. "Please. Anybody can pick up a gun and pretend. She's probably some hobby shooter who hits beer cans off fence posts." But Sarah wasn't pretending. She adjusted the bipod, tested the bolt, and peered through the high-powered scope with the same precision a SEAL would use before a mission. She wasn't showy or dramatic. Every movement was economical, deliberate. Without a word, she loaded a single round, settled into a prone position and let her breathing slow. The world around her seemed to fade away, the murmurs of the men, the wind rattling the flags, even Briggs's scornful smirk. All that existed was the target 1,000 yards downrange and the calm, steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the rifle roared. The shot rang out like thunder, echoing across the valley, and a heartbeat later, the distant ping of metal being struck reached their ears. The gathered SEALs froze. Briggs blinked, certain it had to be luck. "Fluke," he said gruffly. "Even a broken clock's right twice a day." Sarah didn't respond. She simply chambered another round, made a minor adjustment for windage and fired again. Bing. Another perfect hit. Then another. And another. Each shot was faster than the last, her rhythm smooth and unbroken, the rifle becoming an extension of her body. By the fifth shot, the laughter had died completely. Even the most experienced SEALs were watching in stunned silence. Petty Officer Grant crouched beside her, his mouth slightly open as he tracked her shots through his own spotting scope. "Colonel," he whispered almost reverently, "she's not just good. She's perfect." Briggs's smug expression faltered, then hardened into anger. "No one's perfect," he snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "She's probably using luck or some trick." Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm but edged with challenge. "No trick. Just skill. Now, do you want me to stop or should I keep going?" Without waiting for an answer, she switched to a different rifle, an older, bolt-action model favored by Marine snipers, and began hitting targets at varying distances, adjusting effortlessly for range and wind like she'd been born doing it. She even performed a rapid-fire drill on moving targets, a feat that made several SEALs audibly gasp. When she finished, there wasn't a single missed shot, not one target left unmarked. The range was silent for several long seconds. Then one of the younger SEALs muttered almost to himself, "Holy hell, she just broke every record we have." Sarah stood, dusted herself off, and met Briggs's glare without flinching. "You said no one could hit those shots," she said quietly. "Maybe you need to start believing the impossible is possible." The colonel's jaw worked as he struggled for a retort, but before he could speak, Petty Officer Grant stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, we need to know who she is. No civilian shoots like that. Not even close." All eyes turned to Sarah. She gave a small, almost reluctant smile. I was never supposed to be here today, she admitted. I left that life behind years ago. But someone I care about needed me to prove a point. She paused, her gaze sweeping the group of hardened warriors. I was a sniper once. Not in your ranks, but in missions you'll never read about in official reports. My record was classified for a reason. The revelation hit like a grenade. Briggs, red-faced and humiliated, opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah cut him off. You mocked me before you even knew me, Colonel. You assumed because I'm a woman, and because I don't wear a uniform, that I couldn't possibly stand beside your men. Maybe now you'll think twice before underestimating someone. She turned and walked away, leaving the colonel standing in silence, surrounded by SEALs who no longer looked at him with admiration, but at Sarah with awe. Sarah didn't look back as she walked away from the firing line, her boots crunching against the gravel of the range, each step measured and calm despite the storm brewing behind her. The sun was dipping lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the training compound, but the heat between the colonel and his men was just beginning to rise. Colonel Briggs stood frozen for a moment, his face tight with suppressed rage and disbelief, before finally snapping his head toward Petty Officer Grant. Get her back here, he barked, his voice sharp and clipped. No one just strolls onto my range, humiliates my team and walks away like that. I want answers and I want them now. Grant hesitated, his loyalty to the chain of command battling with the respect he now felt for Sarah after witnessing her performance. Sir, with all due respect, he began carefully, she's not someone you can just order around. Did you see those shots? Whoever she is, she's operating on a level beyond anything we've trained for. Maybe it'd be smarter to approach this differently. Briggs rounded on him, eyes blazing. Smarter? You think I care how smart it looks? She just made fools out of us in front of my entire command. If word of this gets out, if anyone starts whispering that some civilian woman outshot my best snipers, my reputation, this unit's reputation, will be ruined. Do you understand what's at stake here, Grant? Grant swallowed hard and nodded, though his gut twisted at the colonel's priorities. It wasn't about skill or honor for Briggs. It was about ego. Still, he turned and jogged after Sarah, catching up to her near the parking lot where a dusty old pickup truck waited. Ma'am, wait, he called, breathless but earnest. Sarah paused, her hand resting on the door handle, and regarded him with calm, watchful eyes. You're one of the few who didn't laugh, she said softly. Why are you here now? Grant exhaled slowly, trying to find the right words. Because I need to understand. You didn't just outshoot us. You outshot every record ever set here, and you did it like it was nothing. That kind of skill doesn't come from hobby shooting or some backwoods hunting trips. Comes from, well, from somewhere I can't even imagine. Who are you really? Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then finally said, I used to be part of something you won't find in any file or database. There are missions in this world that never make it to the evening news, places where success means no one ever knows you were there. I was part of that world once. But I walked away because it cost me everything, friends, family, pieces of myself I'll never get back. She sighed, a flicker of old pain crossing her face before she masked it again. I didn't come here to relive it. I came because someone I care about needed to see that limits are illusions. Now I've done what I came to do, and I'd like to leave it at that. Grant nodded slowly, his respect for her deepening with every word. I get it, he said quietly. I won't push you. But the colonel's not going to let this go. He's furious, and when he's furious he makes reckless moves. Just, be careful. Sarah gave him a small, genuine smile. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind. She opened the truck door and climbed inside, starting the engine with a rumble that echoed in the still evening air. As she pulled away, Grant stood watching until she disappeared down the dusty road, a gnawing sense of unease growing in his gut. Back at the range, Briggs was pacing like a caged animal, his hands clenching and unclenching as he muttered under his breath. When Grant returned, Briggs pounced. Well, what did she say? Who is she? Grant shook his head. She didn't give specifics, sir. Just that she used to be part of something classified. And honestly, based on what I saw, I believe her. That level of skill, that calm under pressure, you don't fake that. Briggs's face darkened further. Classified, huh? We'll see about that. Nobody walks into my house and makes me look like a fool. I don't care if she was in some top-secret program, or if she was a ghost agent from a Black Ops unit. She humiliated me and she'll regret it. Grant's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, maybe this isn't about you. Maybe it's about recognizing talent when you see it. She could be an ally, someone we could learn from. Learn from? Briggs barked a bitter laugh. I don't need to learn from some washed-up sniper who thinks she's better than my men. No, Grant, she's a threat, to me, to this unit, and to everything we've built here. And threats get neutralized. Grant's stomach sank at the implication, but he forced himself to stand at attention and not react. Understood, sir. That night, as darkness cloaked the base and the range fell silent, Sarah sat alone in her small cabin deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. The hum of the crickets and the whisper of the wind through the trees were her only company. She had hoped that by showing up, proving her point and leaving quietly, she could avoid drawing too much attention. But something in Briggs's eyes before she walked away told her that trouble was coming. She moved through the cabin with practiced vigilance, checking windows, securing doors, and laying out a few defensive measures just in case. Old habits died hard, especially for someone who had spent years in hostile territory. As she set a small pistol on the nightstand beside her bed, she thought about the path that had led her here, the missions no one knew about, the faces of teammates lost, the promise she had made to herself to never go back to that life. She had believed she could bury it all. But maybe, she realized grimly, some ghosts never stayed buried. Miles away, Briggs sat in his office, a glass of whiskey in hand and a private phone line open. His voice was low, conspiratorial as he spoke to someone on the other end. I've got a problem, he said, his words slurred slightly with anger and drink. Some hotshot sniper showed up today and made a mockery of me in front of my men. She's dangerous. I need her dealt with quietly. No paper trail, no blowback. Can you handle it? The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and cold. Consider it done, Colonel. What's her name? Briggs hesitated, then sneered. Sarah Carter. Make sure she never embarrasses anyone again. As he hung up the phone, a cruel smile crept across his face. In his mind, the problem was already solved. But what Briggs didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that Sarah wasn't just another target. She had survived war zones, hunted enemies who thought they were the hunters, and walked away from situations that would have broken most people. If he was sending someone after her, they had better be prepared for a fight they wouldn't forget. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves outside Sarah's cabin and the distant call of an owl echoing through the dense forest. Inside, Sarah lay awake in the dark, her senses sharp and attuned to every sound around her. She hadn't survived the life she once led by ignoring her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming at her. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way the night seemed too still, in how the usual rhythm of the woods had been disrupted by an invisible tension pressing down on the air like a storm about to break. Without making a sound, she slid out of bed and crouched low, her hand closing around the grip of the pistol she had set on the nightstand earlier. Moving through the cabin with the silent grace of a predator, she checked each window, each door, every shadowed corner, her breathing steady and controlled. The old wooden floorboards creaked softly under her weight, but she knew exactly how to shift her steps to minimize the noise. Years of training had drilled these movements into her bones, turning them into reflexes she no longer had to think about. When she reached the small back window overlooking the tree line, she froze. At first, she saw nothing but darkness and the tangled outlines of trees swaying gently in the night breeze. Then, in the faint moonlight, she caught a glimmer, metal reflecting ever so slightly in the distance. Binoculars, a scope, maybe even the muzzle of a suppressed rifle. Her pulse quickened, but her face remained a mask of calm. Whoever was out there was good, very good, but not good enough to hide from someone like her. Sarah backed away from the window, her mind working quickly. Briggs had made his move faster than she'd expected. He wasn't just angry, he was scared, and scared men were dangerous. She knew he wouldn't confront her directly. No, he'd send someone else to do his dirty work, someone trained, someone who could make an accident happen in the dead of night with no witnesses and no evidence left behind. Sarah crouched low beside the wooden trunk where she kept her old gear, things she had promised herself she would never need again. Her fingers hovered for a moment over the worn latches, memories flooding back, missions in hostile countries, silent takedowns under cover of darkness, the faces of people she'd saved and those she couldn't. She clenched her jaw, shoving the memories aside, and opened the trunk. Inside lay her old field knife, a compact carbine, a handful of loaded magazines, and a small collection of tools she had once used to survive in places far more dangerous than this forest. She strapped on the knife, slung the carbine over her shoulder, and loaded a magazine with a soft click that sounded loud in the quiet room. Then she killed the lights and slipped out the back door, becoming one with the shadows. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Sarah moved silently through the underbrush, her body low and her steps precise. She circled wide, angling toward where she'd seen the glimmer of metal. Years of experience told her that her enemy would be watching the cabin, expecting her to be inside. They wouldn't be prepared for her to come at them from behind. As she crept closer, the outline of a figure began to take shape among the trees. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing tactical gear, a suppressed rifle cradled in his hands. He was good, his stance alert and disciplined, but he was focused entirely on the cabin. Sarah studied him for a few heartbeats, assessing his equipment, his habits, the way he scanned his surroundings. He was a professional, no doubt about it, but he made a critical mistake. He underestimated his target. With silent precision, Sarah closed the distance between them until she was just a few feet away. Then she struck, exploding from the shadows like a striking snake. Her arm locked around his throat as she drove her knee into the back of his leg, taking him off balance. The man struggled, dropping his rifle, but Sarah was faster and far stronger than her lean frame suggested. She brought her knife to his throat in a flash of cold steel. "Who sent you?" she hissed, her voice low and deadly calm. The man gasped for air, his hands clawing at hers. "You don't understand," he choked out. "They'll kill me if I talk." Sarah's grip tightened. "You should be more afraid of me right now." She pressed the blade just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Tell me who sent you." The man trembled, his resolve crumbling under her icy stare. "Colonel Briggs," he finally spat. He said you were a threat, that you'd expose something, ruin everything. I was just supposed to take you out clean, make it look like an accident." Sarah's lip curled in a humorless smile. "He should have sent more than one of you." With a swift motion, she struck the man at a pressure point on his neck, rendering him unconscious. She tied his hands and feet with his own gear, then melted back into the darkness, her mind racing. Briggs wasn't just trying to protect his pride now, he was trying to protect a secret. Something bigger than hurt feelings or damaged reputations. If he was willing to risk sending a hired killer after her, that meant whatever he was hiding could destroy him if it came to light. Sarah retrieved the man's rifle and checked his communications gear. A small earpiece and encrypted radio confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't a random mercenary. Briggs had access to serious resources, the kind that didn't leave paper trails. She slipped the earpiece into her own ear and listened, catching fragments of a conversation between the colonel and another voice she didn't recognize. "Target neutralized yet?" Briggs's voice was sharp, impatient. "Negative," the other voice replied, tinged with static. "No sign of movement. Cabin appears quiet." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Briggs had more men out there, probably watching from different angles. She crouched low, formulating a plan. She couldn't just run. If she disappeared, Briggs would spin the story to make her look like the aggressor. She needed proof, undeniable evidence of what he was doing. And to get that, she would have to go on the offensive. Moving like a shadow, she worked her way through the trees, taking out one guard after another with silent precision. Each man was highly trained, but they were unprepared for someone of her caliber. By the time she reached the outer perimeter, 3 bodies lay unconscious in the undergrowth, their weapons confiscated and their radios feeding false information back to Briggs. She set up a small field camera she carried in her pack, angling it toward the captured men and their gear. If Briggs tried to deny this later, she would have video evidence of his private strike team. Finally, she slipped away into the night, her destination clear in her mind, the base itself. If Briggs wanted to play games, she would bring the fight to his doorstep. Back at the base, Briggs paced in his office, his hands clasped behind his back, sweat beading on his brow. He had expected a simple solution, a clean removal of an inconvenient problem. But the longer he waited without confirmation, the more uneasy he became. When the radio finally crackled to life with a distorted voice saying, "All clear, target neutralized," Briggs allowed himself a smirk. "Good," he muttered. "Make sure there's no trace left behind. I want this wrapped up before dawn." But that smirk vanished when the door to his office swung open without warning and Sarah stepped inside, her silhouette framed by the harsh overhead light. She was calm, collected, and very much alive. Briggs stumbled back in shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You," he stammered. "Impossible." Sarah shut the door behind her with a deliberate click, her gaze cold and unyielding. "You should have sent an army," she said flatly. "But now, Colonel, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation." Briggs's face drained of color as Sarah advanced slowly into the room, her boots silent on the polished floor but her presence carrying a weight that seemed to press down on him like a physical force. The harsh overhead light revealed the sharp lines of her face, the calm precision of her movements, and the unwavering focus in her eyes. She carried no visible weapon, but Briggs knew without a doubt that she was more dangerous than anyone he had ever commanded. He stumbled backward until his back hit the edge of his desk, knocking over a half-empty glass of whiskey that shattered on the floor, the sound loud in the tense silence. "Why, you're supposed to be dead," he stammered, his voice breaking. "My men reported." "Your men are tied up in the woods, Colonel," Sarah cut in coldly, her tone like a razor's edge. "Alive, unharmed, and very cooperative once I made it clear what would happen if they didn't talk. They told me everything. How you ordered the hit, how you used resources that were never meant to be under your personal control. I even recorded their confessions along with video of them in their gear. So if you were thinking about denying this later, don't bother." She stepped closer, and Briggs instinctively tried to retreat, but there was nowhere left to go. "Why?" she demanded, her voice low but deadly. "Why go to these lengths to silence me? This isn't just about being embarrassed on the range. What are you hiding, Colonel?" Briggs's mouth opened and closed, sweat pouring down his temples as he searched for words. Finally he snarled, anger overtaking his fear. "You don't understand what you've walked into. You think this is about my ego? This is bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than this entire base. I've been running operations that keep this country safe, operations so classified they make your past look like child's play. If anyone found out about them, if there was even a hint of exposure, it would bring the whole system crashing down. And you showing up here with your damn perfect shooting, making everyone question me, you were a threat I couldn't afford." Sarah tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "So instead of addressing the threat honestly, you tried to erase it. Typical." Her voice dripped with contempt. "What kind of operations, Briggs? Human trafficking? Illegal weapons sales? Or just good old-fashioned treason for profit?" Briggs's eyes flashed with rage, but also a flicker of guilt he couldn't hide. "I did what I had to do," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Funding's been cut for years. Bureaucrats sitting in offices miles away make decisions that put my men in the field at risk. So I found other ways to get what we needed. Deals with contractors, off-the-books missions, covert alliances. It worked, until you showed up and made everyone look at me like a failure." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You're stealing from the very country you swore to protect. And you think that makes you a patriot?" Briggs's breath came in ragged gasps. "You don't get it. Without me, without what I've built, half the operations we run would collapse. You think Washington cares about the soldiers on the ground? They don't. They just care about numbers on a spreadsheet. I care about results." Sarah took another step forward, her voice deadly quiet. "You care about control. That's all this has ever been about. And now you're going to pay for it." Briggs's hand darted suddenly toward the side of his desk, and Sarah moved instantly, knocking his arm aside just as his fingers grazed the grip of a concealed handgun. She slammed him back against the desk, twisting his wrist until he dropped the weapon with a yelp of pain. In one smooth motion, she kicked the gun across the room, then shoved him into his chair with enough force to rattle the frame. "Sit," she ordered. Briggs obeyed, his chest heaving, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Here's how this is going to go," Sarah said, her tone icy and precise. "You're going to give me access to every file, every communication, every piece of evidence related to your off-the-books operations. You're going to do it willingly because if you don't, I will make sure the video I took tonight goes directly to the Military Oversight Committee, the press, and every intelligence watchdog group I can find. You'll be finished before sunrise." Briggs's jaw clenched so hard Sarah thought his teeth might crack. "You think you can just blackmail me? You have no idea the kind of people I answer to. If you cross them, they won't just come after you, they'll burn down everything you've ever cared about." Sarah leaned in close, her face inches from his, her voice dropping to a whisper that chilled him to the bone. "Let them try." She straightened and gestured toward his computer. "Start talking, Colonel." Briggs hesitated, then, with a look of pure hatred, began typing commands into the secure terminal on his desk. As he worked, Sarah moved around the room, keeping a sharp eye on him and noting every detail. Stacks of classified folders lined the shelves, each labeled with cryptic designations. A locked cabinet in the corner practically screamed evidence. She opened it and found bundles of cash, foreign passports, and hard drives full of unmarked data. It was worse than she'd imagined. Briggs wasn't just running side deals to keep his unit afloat. He was running an entire shadow network of illegal activity. When he finally pulled up the main database, Sarah activated a small flash drive she'd brought with her, plugging it into the terminal. "Download everything," she ordered. Briggs glared at her but complied, the progress bar creeping slowly across the screen. "You're digging your own grave," he muttered. "The second you walk out of here with that data, you become the most wanted person in the country. You think you can hide from the military, from intelligence agencies, from the kind of men I work for? They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." Sarah didn't flinch. "Let them hunt," she said coldly. "I've spent my life being hunted. And I've always survived." The download completed with a soft chime, and Sarah yanked the drive free, slipping it into a hidden pocket inside her jacket. "We're done here," she said, turning toward the door. Briggs lunged for her, but she anticipated the move, spinning and striking him in the chest with a force that knocked the wind out of him. He collapsed back into his chair, gasping and clutching his ribs. Sarah paused in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the hallway lights. "You had a chance to do the right thing," she said, her voice filled with quiet fury. "Instead, you chose to betray everything you were supposed to stand for. Now you'll answer for it." She slipped into the hallway and vanished like a ghost, leaving Briggs seething and broken. Outside, the night was cool and still, but Sarah's mind was a storm. She had the evidence, but getting it out safely would be another challenge entirely. Briggs wouldn't sit idle. He would throw everything he had at stopping her before she reached anyone who could act on the information. She needed an ally, someone she could trust completely. And as she thought back to the only man on that range who hadn't mocked her, who had looked at her with genuine respect instead of derision, she knew exactly who defined. Petty Officer Grant might just be the key to bringing down Colonel Briggs, and to surviving the war that was about to erupt. The forest was shrouded in a pre-dawn mist as Sarah moved swiftly but silently along an old deer trail, every step measured and deliberate. She knew she had only a few hours before Colonel Briggs realized the full scope of what she had taken from him and mobilized every resource at his disposal to hunt her down. The flash drive containing his secrets felt heavy in her jacket pocket, a weight far greater than its physical mass. With it, she held proof of his corruption and the power to dismantle his entire shadow network, but only if she could get it into the right hands before he caught her. She needed someone she could trust, someone inside the system who still believed in honor and truth. Her mind went immediately to Petty Officer Grant. He had been the only one on that firing range who had treated her with a hint of respect, the only one who had looked past appearances and recognized her skill for what it was. If anyone would listen, it would be him. The problem was reaching him without leading Briggs's men straight to him. Sarah doubled back through the woods, covering her tracks with the skill of someone who had spent years evading hostile forces in foreign lands. When she finally reached a secluded road, she stole an old dirt bike from a hunting cabin, hot-wiring it with ease before roaring off toward the base. She kept to back roads and narrow trails, avoiding surveillance cameras and checkpoints. Briggs would already have patrols looking for her, and she couldn't afford to leave a single clue. By the time she reached the outskirts of the base, the first gray light of morning was creeping over the horizon. She stashed the bike in a thicket and moved on foot, slipping through the perimeter like a shadow. Her destination wasn't the barracks or the command center. It was the small, isolated training shack where Grant often worked alone before the others woke up. If she was lucky, she'd reach him before anyone else did. Inside the shack, Grant was bent over a workbench, cleaning his rifle and lost in thought. He hadn't been able to sleep since the night before. Something about Sarah's skill, her words, and the cold fire in her eyes haunted him. When he heard a soft scrape at the door, he instinctively reached for his sidearm. "Who's there?" he demanded. "It's me," came Sarah's voice, low and urgent. "Open up, but keep quiet." Grant's pulse quickened. He hurried to the door, cracked it open, and pulled her inside, locking it behind her. "Jesus, Sarah," he whispered, scanning her for injuries. "I thought you were dead. Briggs told everyone you attacked one of his patrols and ran. He said you were armed and dangerous." Sarah gave a humorless laugh. "Armed, yes. Dangerous only to people who deserve it. Briggs is lying to cover his own crimes. I have proof." She pulled the flash drive from her pocket and held it up between them. Grant's eyes widened. "What's on it?" "Everything," Sarah said. "Financial records, mission logs, communications. He's been running illegal operations for years. Selling weapons, laundering money, cutting deals with foreign agents. Last night, he tried to have me killed to protect himself." Grant ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "Damn it. That explains so much. I've seen things that didn't add up, but I never had evidence." "If this is real, it's real," Sarah said firmly. "But evidence alone isn't enough. Briggs has allies, powerful ones. If we don't act fast, he'll spin this so I look like the traitor and he comes out smelling like roses." Grant clenched his fists. "So what's the plan?" Sarah's voice was steady and precise. First, we need to make a copy of this data and send it to someone outside Briggs's reach. Someone high enough up the chain that Briggs can't bury it. Do you know anyone like that? Grant hesitated, then nodded. Admiral Jensen. He's old school, strict but fair. If we can get this to him, he'll take it seriously. Good, Sarah said. Where is he? He's visiting another base right now, but he's due back this afternoon. We can transmit the data securely from the comms center, but it's risky. Briggs has that place locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Sarah's mouth curved into a thin smile. Risky is my specialty. Before Grant could respond, the sound of approaching boots reached their ears. Sarah's head snapped toward the door, her body instantly alert. He's found us, she hissed. Grant grabbed his rifle and checked the window. 2 squads closing in fast. How the hell did they know you were here? Sarah's mind raced. They didn't track me. They tracked you. Briggs probably has you under constant surveillance just in case you ever turned on him. Grant swore under his breath. So what now? Sarah's eyes hardened. Now we fight our way out. She darted to the far side of the shack, checking sight lines and angles of fire. We'll split them up. Draw them inside where their numbers don't matter. Take them out quietly if you can, but don't hesitate if you have to go loud. Grant nodded grimly. Understood. The first squad breached the door seconds later, moving in perfect formation. Sarah dropped from her perch in the rafters like a wraith, striking the lead man before he even knew she was there. His rifle clattered to the floor as she spun and took down the second with a brutal elbow to the jaw. Grant opened fire on the third and fourth, his shots precise and controlled. The room filled with chaos, shouts, and the sharp crack of suppressed gunfire. When it was over, 4 men lay unconscious or worse, and Sarah was already dragging their bodies into a corner, stripping them of gear and radios. That was just the first wave, she said, tossing Grant a headset. Briggs will send more. We need to move. They slipped out a side window just as another squad stormed the front, disappearing into the misty woods. Sarah led Grant through a series of twists and turns, doubling back to confuse their pursuers. They finally reached a small ravine where they could catch their breath. Grant looked at her in awe. You move like you've been doing this your whole life. Sarah gave him a wry look. I have. She checked the flash drive again, her expression grim. We get this to Admiral Jensen and Briggs goes down. But until then we're the hunted. As if to punctuate her words, the distant thrum of helicopter blades reached their ears. Grant's stomach sank. He's deploying air support. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Good. Let him bring everything he's got. The harder he comes at us, the more desperate he looks. We'll turn his own aggression against him. She rose to her feet, determination radiating from her like a palpable force. This isn't just about survival anymore, Grant. It's about exposing the truth. Briggs thought he could control the narrative, but tonight we take that power away from him. Grant nodded, his fear replaced by resolve. Then let's make sure we live to tell the story. Together, they vanished into the mist once more, 2 against an army, carrying the one thing that could bring a corrupt empire crashing down. The forest exploded into chaos as the thundering roar of helicopter blades swept over the treetops, scattering mist and leaves like a storm. Sarah and Grant dove for cover beneath the thick canopy of pines, pressing themselves against the cold earth as a searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth like an unblinking eye. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but her breathing remained steady, controlled. This wasn't the first time she'd been hunted from the sky, and she knew panic was a death sentence. She signaled to Grant with a sharp hand gesture, urging him to stay still as the beam passed dangerously close. Grant's face was pale, his jaw clenched, but he trusted her completely. Above them, the chopper circled, the metallic whirring of its rotors blending with the distant shouts of Briggs's ground teams pushing through the underbrush. Dogs barked, radios crackled, and the forest became a net closing around them. Sarah's mind raced, analyzing their position. They were boxed in. Staying put meant eventual capture, and fighting here would get them surrounded. They needed to move, but moving meant drawing attention. Slowly, she leaned close to Grant's ear and whispered, "We split. Draw them apart. Meet at the old ranger station 2 clicks east." Grant's eyes widened. "Split? Sarah, they'll cut us down." Her gaze was unflinching. "Not if we make them chase shadows. You're fast, you know the terrain. Led one squad on a wild goose chase. I'll take the other." Grant hesitated, torn between fear and trust, then nodded once. "See you there." Sarah gave him a small, fierce smile before slipping silently into the darkness. Moments later, Grant broke cover in the opposite direction, deliberately crashing through brush to create noise. The tactic worked instantly. 2 squads peeled off to pursue him, their shouts and barking dogs fading as they plunged deeper into the woods. Sarah watched from the shadows, her body blending seamlessly with the darkness. When the remaining squad passed beneath her perch, she dropped like a phantom, landing silently behind the last man. In one fluid motion, she swept his legs out from under him and drove her knife into the soft earth beside his head, a silent warning before she knocked him unconscious with a swift strike. The others spun around too late. Sarah moved like a ghost, a blur of lethal precision. 2 more went down before they could even raise their rifles, and the last fell to a single suppressed shot from her pistol. By the time the searchlight swept back over the area, the squad was gone, their radios feeding false updates Sarah had recorded to mislead Briggs. She stripped one of the radios and clipped it to her belt, listening in as Briggs's voice barked over the channel, filled with fury and barely controlled panic. "Where the hell are my teams? Report. Now." Another voice, shaky and breathless, responded, "We've got visual on one hostile, pursuing east through Sector 6. Sarah smiled grimly. Graham was doing his part perfectly. She switched to a different frequency and spoke in a low, distorted tone. "Target neutralized. Moving to secure site. Stand by." The lie slipped through the network like poison, sowing confusion among Briggs's men. If they didn't know who to trust, their coordination would crumble. Using the chaos to her advantage, Sarah slipped deeper into the forest, heading for the rendezvous point. Her mind never stopped working, calculating every step, every angle. Briggs wasn't just a corrupt officer. He was a master manipulator with resources that reached far beyond this base. Taking him down would require more than brute force. She needed undeniable proof, public exposure, and a way to protect Grant, who had risked everything by siding with her. As she moved, memories surfaced unbidden, faces of people she had once trusted, teammates who had died in the shadows of missions no one would ever acknowledge. She had sworn never to go back to that life, never to let the darkness consume her again. But looking at what Briggs had built, the lives he had ruined, she knew she couldn't walk away. By the time Sarah reached the ranger station, the first light of dawn was bleeding across the horizon, painting the misty forest in shades of gray and gold. The old building stood abandoned, its windows shattered and roof sagging, but it offered cover. She slipped inside and swept the interior for threats, finding only dust and cobwebs. Minutes later, Grant burst through the door, gasping for breath and dripping sweat. "You made it," Sarah said, relief flashing briefly in her eyes. Grant leaned against the wall trying to catch his breath. "Barely. Those bastards don't quit. I think I lost them around the creek, but they'll regroup fast." Sarah nodded. "Then we don't have much time." She pulled out the flash drive and set it on a broken table between them. "This is our leverage. We need to get it to Admiral Jensen before Briggs realizes how close we are." Grant frowned. "How do we even reach him? The base comms center is crawling with Briggs's loyalists. We'd never make it past the checkpoints." Sarah's lips curved into a thin, calculating smile. "We don't go through them. We go under them." Grant blinked. "Under?" She crouched and began sketching a crude map in the dust. "Old maintenance tunnels run beneath the base. Most people don't even know they exist anymore, but I used them once, years ago, when this place was just a training facility. They lead directly to the comms center." Grant stared at her. "You've been here before?" Sarah didn't look up. "A long time ago. Different mission, different life. Doesn't matter now. What matters is getting through those tunnels before Briggs locks down the entire facility." Before they could move, the distant thump of boots and the crackle of radios reached their ears. Sarah's head snapped up. "He's closing in." Grant grabbed his rifle. "Then we fight." Sarah shook her head. "No. We run smart." She scooped up the flash drive and tucked it into her jacket. "Follow me and don't look back." They slipped out a rear window and sprinted through the trees, weaving a winding path designed to throw off pursuit. Sarah led them to a small, overgrown clearing where a rusted metal hatch lay hidden beneath a tangle of roots. She dropped to her knees and yanked it open, revealing a dark shaft descending into the earth. "Down," she ordered. Grant swallowed hard, then climbed in without hesitation. Sarah followed, sealing the hatch above them just as the first of Briggs's men reached the clearing. Inside the tunnel, the air was damp and stale, the narrow space lit only by the dim glow of Sarah's flashlight. The walls were lined with old pipes and cables, remnants of a forgotten infrastructure project. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved quickly, Sarah leading the way with absolute certainty. How much further? Grant whispered, his voice tight with tension. Half a mile, Sarah replied. Once we reach the access hatch beneath the comms center, we'll have one shot to transmit the data. After that, all hell will break loose. Grant's grip tightened on his rifle. Then let's make it count. As they pushed deeper into the tunnels, Sarah's instincts prickled. Something was wrong. She halted abruptly, raising a hand for silence. Grant froze, listening. A faint metallic click echoed through the darkness ahead. Sarah's stomach dropped. Booby trap, she breathed. Briggs knew about the tunnels. Even as the words left her mouth, a deafening explosion ripped through the passage behind them, blasting them forward into the dirt. The tunnel shook violently, dust and debris raining down. Coughing, ears ringing, Sarah scrambled to her feet. The way back was blocked by a wall of rubble. Trapped between Briggs's forces and a blocked escape, she realized with grim clarity that there was no turning back now. We keep moving, she said, her voice hard with determination. We finish this no matter what. Grant nodded, his eyes blazing with resolve. Together, they plunged into the darkness, heading straight toward the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The tunnel ahead was a suffocating maze of darkness, the only illumination coming from Sarah's small flashlight beam cutting through the dust-filled air. The explosion had collapsed the passage behind them, sealing off any chance of retreat. Every step forward was a gamble, but there was no other option. The walls were slick with moisture, the air heavy with the smell of rust and old earth. Sarah moved silently, her senses razor-sharp, scanning for tripwires or pressure plates Briggs might have planted. Grant followed closely, his breathing shallow but controlled, his rifle raised and ready. The muffled hum of machinery above them grew louder as they neared the heart of the base. Sarah's mind replayed the map she'd memorized years ago. She knew there would be a junction ahead where the tunnel split in 3 directions. 2 were dead ends, the third led directly beneath the comms center. But she also knew Briggs wasn't stupid. He would expect her to know these tunnels. That meant traps, ambushes, maybe even waiting men. When they reached the junction, Sarah held up a hand, signaling Grant to freeze. She crouched low, examining the ground. Her light caught the faintest glimmer of a thin wire stretched across the right-hand path. She traced it to a block of C4 tucked into a crevice. A single misstep would have turned the entire junction into a tomb. She disarmed it with steady hands, then motioned Grant to follow the center path. Stay exactly in my footsteps, she whispered. Briggs has laid this whole place like a minefield. They moved slowly, every muscle tense. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to crouch as they pushed forward. Sarah's flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat they were plunged into total darkness. Grant's breath hitched, but Sarah gave his arm a reassuring squeeze before tapping the light back to life. When they finally reached a rusted ladder leading up to a circular hatch, Sarah exhaled slowly. This is it. Comms center is directly above. Grant wiped sweat from his brow. So what's the play? Sarah's voice was calm but firm. I go up first, neutralize anyone inside. Once it's clear, you follow and guard the door. We'll transmit the data to Admiral Jensen, but we'll only have minutes before Briggs figures out where we are. Grant nodded. Understood. Sarah climbed the ladder with practiced ease, easing the hatch open just enough to scan the room. 2 armed guards stood by the door, their attention fixed on the corridor beyond. She slipped through the opening like a shadow, landing silently behind them. In 2 swift motions, she struck them both with precise, disabling blows, lowering them gently to the floor before signaling to Grant. He emerged seconds later, eyes wide at her efficiency. Clear, she said. Lock the door. While Grant secured the entrance, Sarah sprinted to the comms terminal. The room was cluttered with outdated equipment, glowing screens and tangled wires. She shoved a headset on and began bypassing security protocols with the speed of someone who had done this many times before. Come on, she muttered under her breath, fingers flying over the keyboard. Finally, the system accepted her access code. A secure channel opened. She uploaded the data from the flash drive, her heart pounding as lines of text scrolled across the screen. Evidence of every crime, every betrayal Briggs had committed. On the other end of the channel, Admiral Jensen's voice crackled to life. This is Jensen. Identify yourself. Sarah leaned close to the mic. This is Operative Ghost, former Special Activities Division. Briggs is compromised. Data incoming contains proof of treason and corruption. You need to move now. There was a long pause. When Jensen spoke again, his tone was cold and precise. Confirmed receipt. Ghost, your intel is damning. Stand by for extraction. Relief surged through Sarah's chest, but before she could respond, the entire building shook violently. A deafening boom echoed through the walls, followed by blaring alarms. Grant cursed. "He knows we're here." Sarah ripped off the headset. "He's trying to bury us with the evidence." The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness lit only by emergency red strobes. Grant aimed his rifle at the door as it began to rattle under heavy impacts. "They're coming in." Sarah grabbed a satchel from the corner and shoved the terminal's core drive into it. "We can't hold this position. We need to take the fight to him." The door burst open, splinters flying. Briggs's men stormed through, their rifles blazing. Sarah and Grant dove behind overturned consoles, returning fire with precision. Sarah moved like a storm, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned down, her shots unerring. Grant covered her flank, his SEAL training shining through. The fight was brutal and close quarters. At one point, a soldier lunged at Sarah with a combat knife. She twisted aside, using his own momentum to slam him headfirst into a console before finishing him with a clean strike. When the last man fell, the room was a wreck of shattered equipment and smoking debris. Sarah didn't pause. "Move!" she barked, hauling Grant toward a side corridor. They sprinted through the labyrinthine halls of the base, alarms blaring around them. Briggs's voice boomed over the intercom, filled with rage. "You think you can undermine me, Ghost? You think you can destroy everything I've built? I made you. You were nothing until I gave you purpose." Sarah snarled, her pace never slowing. "You never gave me anything but lies." As they rounded a corner, a squad appeared ahead, blocking their path. Sarah hurled a flashbang, the blinding light and deafening blast giving them precious seconds to cut through their enemies. By the time the smoke cleared, only Sarah and Grant remained standing. Grant gasped. "Where the hell are we going?" Sarah pointed to a heavy steel door at the end of the corridor. "Command deck. Briggs will be there. We end this now." They reached the door and found it sealed with a biometric lock. Sarah knelt, pulling a compact device from her gear. "Cover me." Grant stood guard while Sarah hacked the system, her fingers working with frantic speed. Sparks flew, circuits fried, and the lock disengaged with a hiss. The door slid open, revealing a massive room lined with monitors and tactical maps. At the center stood Colonel Briggs, flanked by two heavily armed bodyguards. His face twisted into a sneer as he saw Sarah. "You really think you've won?" he mocked. "That data won't save you. I control the narrative. When this is over, you'll be branded a traitor and no one will remember your name." Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and lethal. "The difference between you and me, Briggs, is that I don't need anyone to remember my name. I just need them to remember yours." His eyes narrowed with hate. "Kill them." The bodyguards moved in unison, opening fire. Sarah and Grant split, diving behind cover. The room erupted in gunfire, the deafening roar bouncing off steel walls. Sarah rolled across the floor, popping up to take a precise shot that dropped one guard instantly. Grant engaged the second in brutal hand-to-hand combat, finally disarming him and snapping his weapon away before finishing him with a strike to the throat. Briggs backed toward the far console, fumbling for a sidearm. "Stay back," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. Sarah stalked toward him, every step measured. "It's over," she said coldly. "Jensen has the data. Your men are either dead or questioning your every order. You've lost." Briggs's hand trembled as he raised his weapon. "If I go down, I'm taking you with me." Sarah moved faster than thought. In one fluid motion, she twisted his wrist, disarmed him, and slammed him against the console. "No," she whispered. "You're going to face justice." She cuffed him with his own restraints, then turned to Grant. "We need to signal Jensen for extraction before Briggs's loyalists blow this place sky high." Grant nodded, breathing hard. "Let's finish this." Together, they prepared for the final push, knowing the storm wasn't over yet but that for the first time, they had a fighting chance. The room reeked of gunpowder and blood, the sharp tang of ozone from fried electronics hanging thick in the air as Sarah tightened the cuffs on Briggs's wrists and shoved him toward the center console. His face was twisted with rage and disbelief, his once perfectly pressed uniform now torn and stained. Alarms still blared through the base, their shrill wail mixing with the distant thunder of helicopters and shouting men as the facility dissolved into chaos. Sarah knew they didn't have long. Briggs had been arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He would have contingency plans, fail-safes to destroy evidence and silence anyone who dared oppose him. "Grant, secure the door," she barked, scanning the monitors for signs of approaching troops. Grant slammed the heavy steel door shut and jammed it with a broken rifle, then took up a defensive position. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they breach again, he warned, his voice tight with adrenaline. Sarah nodded grimly. Then we move fast. She activated the console, fingers flying over the controls as she accessed the secure comms channel. Static hissed for a moment before Admiral Jensen's calm, authoritative voice came through. Ghost report. Sarah didn't waste a second. Briggs is in custody. I'm transmitting real-time data now. His entire operation is exposed, every illegal deal, every covert mission off the books. But we're trapped inside the command deck, and his men are about to break through. Jensen's voice sharpened. Hold your position. I'm mobilizing military police and federal agents. Extraction teams are inbound. Keep that bastard alive, he's going to answer for this. Briggs snarled, straining against his cuffs. You think you've won? Even if Jensen believes you, I've planted enough evidence to frame you both as traitors. When this place goes up in flames, the world will only see 2 rogue operatives who tried to assassinate a decorated officer. Sarah's eyes burned with cold fury. The difference is, Briggs, I don't need to spin lies. The truth is enough. She slammed her hand on the console, sending the data stream directly to multiple government servers and encrypted backup sites. Even if Briggs destroyed this base, the evidence would live on. Suddenly, the entire building shuddered violently. A deep, mechanical rumble reverberated through the walls. Grant swore. What the hell was that? Sarah's stomach clenched. She scanned the monitors and saw a blinking red warning spreading across the screen. Self-destruct sequence. Briggs has rigged the power core to detonate. He's going to take the whole base and everyone in it, with him. Grant's face went pale. How long do we have? Sarah's fingers flew over the keys, calculating. 12 minutes, maybe less. Briggs laughed, the sound wild and broken. If I can't control it, no one will. You'll die here, Ghost, buried under the weight of your own rebellion. Sarah silenced him with a hard strike to the jaw that left him dazed. Stay conscious, she snapped. You're coming with us. She turned to Grant, her voice clipped and urgent. We have 2 priorities. Get Briggs out alive and disable the detonation if possible. There's a manual override in the power core chamber, but it's heavily guarded. Grant checked his rifle. Then we fight our way there. You handle the override, I'll cover you. Sarah gave a curt nod. Let's move. They dragged Briggs toward a maintenance corridor, Sarah taking point while Grant watched their rear. The hallways were a war zone, debris littering the floors, smoke billowing from ruptured pipes. Briggs's loyalists appeared in waves, desperate to stop them. Sarah and Grant moved like a single entity, their movements precise and deadly. Sarah's shots were surgical, each one dropping an enemy before they could react. Grant provided suppressive fire, forcing enemies into cover and clearing their path forward. At one junction, a grenade clattered across the floor. Sarah kicked it back down the hall without breaking stride, the explosion rocking the walls behind them. Briggs stumbled and cursed, but Sarah yanked him upright. You're not dying here, she hissed. You're going to stand trial and face every single person you betrayed. They reached the blast door to the power core chamber with 5 minutes remaining. It was sealed with another biometric lock, but Sarah didn't bother hacking it this time. She rigged a shaped charge from scavenged explosives and detonated it, the blast tearing the door from its hinges. The heat inside was oppressive, the air shimmering with energy from the humming reactor at the center of the room. A squad of elite soldiers stood between them and the override panel, their black armor gleaming under the harsh lights. The leader raised his weapon and shouted, "Kill them!" Sarah and Grant dove into cover as gunfire erupted. The fight was brutal and close-range, bullets sparking off metal catwalks. Sarah moved with deadly grace, vaulting over railings and striking with perfect precision. Grant was a wall of firepower, his rifle spitting controlled bursts that cut down foes with ruthless efficiency. Despite their skill, the squad was relentless and the clock was ticking. Sarah spotted a narrow maintenance beam above the reactor. If she could cross it, she could reach the override panel while Grant distracted the soldiers. She signaled her plan with a quick hand gesture. Grant responded with a nod and a burst of suppressive fire that drew the enemy's attention. Sarah sprinted, leaping onto the beam and balancing precariously as she dashed across. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing her arm, but she didn't falter. She reached the override panel with 3 minutes to spare and immediately began entering the shutdown sequence. Behind her, Grant roared a challenge and charged into the fray, buying her precious seconds with sheer ferocity. Briggs shouted from where he was restrained, his voice hoarse with rage. "You'll never stop it. My system is foolproof." Sarah's fingers flew over the controls. Nothing is foolproof, she growled. Especially when the fool is you. The final command executed with a satisfying beep. The humming of the reactor shifted, then slowly powered down. The countdown froze at 32 seconds. Sarah exhaled sharply, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "It's done," she shouted. Grant grinned through blood and sweat. "Then let's get the hell out of here." With the immediate threat neutralized, they fought their way back through the corridors, carrying Briggs between them. As they reached the outer hangar, the sound of rotor blades filled the air. A team of military police stormed in, weapons raised. Admiral Jensen himself descended from a helicopter, his stern face a mask of controlled fury. "Stand down," he barked. The MPs aimed their rifles at Briggs, who glared defiantly even as they hauled him away. Jensen turned to Sarah and Grant, his gaze softening slightly. "You two did the impossible. The evidence you sent is already being processed. Briggs will face a court-martial and spend the rest of his life in a cell." Sarah straightened, exhaustion and relief warring on her face. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about the men and women he used, the ones who never had a voice." Jensen nodded. "They'll have one now. You've done your country a great service." As the MPs secured the area, Sarah walked to the edge of the landing pad, staring out at the rising sun. Grant joined her, his expression thoughtful. "So what now?" he asked. Sarah was silent for a long moment before finally replying, "Now we disappear. There's always another Briggs out there, another fight waiting. But today we won." Grant gave a small, tired smile. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just some civilian trying to prove a point. Now I know better." Sarah allowed herself a faint smile. "I was never trying to prove anything, Grant. I just wanted the truth to matter." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Briggs to face justice, Sarah and Grant vanished into the forest like ghosts, leaving behind a shattered empire and a story no one would ever forget. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, if only slightly. The battle was over, but the war for truth would never truly end. And she was ready for it. The end.